I am Dr. Ann Davis with Bible Interact, and I've been having fun doing these little trips to Israel. I've been to Israel many times. I've never taken a group, but I go sometimes alone, sometimes with colleagues, and we visit biblical sites and film them so that I can come back and teach on those biblical sites. So this time we're going to work on the story of Gideon. We can read the story of Gideon, who defeated the Midianites with only 300 men. How much more engaging will it be to travel to Israel, albeit vicariously, to experience the story of Gideon? We will start in Jerusalem. We're going to travel north through the hill country to the site of Gideon's home, then to Mount Gilboa, and finally down into the Jezreel Valley, where the Midianites were camped at Mount Moreh in the middle of the Jezreel Valley. So we read that the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah. Now, we don't know exactly that location, but it was up in the northern part of the hill country, so I just put a circle there in the northern part of the hill country, which belonged to Joash. Now, the Avi Ezri, let me show you that in Hebrew. Avi, Hebrew names have meaning. Avi is my father. The E ending is my. Av, father, Avi, my father. Azar is the verb to help, like Ezra. Ezra is a helper. That's his name. And we have Ha, Ezri, with that. The E ending is my again. So, my helper. So, God, my helper, or God is my helper. And so Joash, the Avi Ezri, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress, now we're going to take a look at the winepress, in order to save it from the Midianites. Now the Midianites were a nomadic people that lived quite a bit farther south actually than I can show you because my picture is there. They were nomads, and they came north, crossed the Jordan River, and just marauded the Israelites who were unable to defend themselves. This is during the period of the Judges. Now we're going to start in Jerusalem. It's just amazing when you land at Ben Gurion Airport, drive up into the hill country. Jerusalem's in the hill country, and then you see the old city walls of Jerusalem. Is really quite something. I know many of you have been there. Okay, we're going to go in through the Sha'ar Yafo. Sha'ar is Hebrew for gate. Yafo is that little port down on the Mediterranean. And there was a road between Yafo, called Jaffa in English, that goes up to Jerusalem. So in English, we call it the Jaffa Gate, Hebrew Sha'ar Yafo. We enter the Sha'ar Yafo and come to a fairly good-sized plaza. Very busy. There are vendors, there are people. It's very busy. We're going to walk through the plaza to the other end of the plaza, where we will come to King David Street. Now that's quite narrow. It goes down, and there you go, and there's like a step down, and you go a little farther, step down, a little farther, step down. There are vendors on both sides. A lot of them are Arabs, but there are also Israeli vendors in here. Of course, the Arabs are Israelis. They live in Israel, and they're Israeli citizens. But they have different kinds of products than the Israelis do. So we're going to go down King David Street, but fairly quickly we're going to turn off to the right and take another street that parallels King David Street, but it's there's no commerce at all. It's commercial. So it's kind of a narrow walkway, and we walk down that, and we will eventually come to the Lutheran Guest House, which is where I like to stay. I have a former member of my board of directors of Bible Interact that's a Lutheran minister and arranges for me to stay at the Lutheran Guest House. It's right in the middle of the old city, and it's quite an experience to stay there. It's on that little side walkway that parallels King David Street. Here's the living room type of area that is available to everybody. And the rooms, the Lutherans are German. They're very clean, but very Spartan. It's very simple. It's not fancy at all. They hire Palestinian who are they're members of Israel. They're citizens of Israel, but they live in East Jerusalem, which where the Palestinian Arabs live. But that part of Israel, and they are citizens of Israel. They are Christians, and they're the ones who the Lutherans hire to run the Lutheran guest house. And they're very, very wonderful, kind, friendly people. Now, here's the Sha'ar Yafo, the Jaffa Gate we're going to enter. And we came into that plaza and then down to King David Street, and then we cut off to the side to go over to the Lutheran guest house. That's what we've done so far. Now let me show you, there are 4 different quarters, and they're in different colors. The brown is the Christian quarter, and the most important thing in the Christian quarter is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is I have there in red, and around it are a lot of vendors. A lot of them are Arab Israelis. And then we have green area is the Armenian quarter. There's not much commerce that goes on in the Armenian quarter, but they have a restaurant that is my absolute favorite restaurant, and it's easy to get to from the Lutheran hospice. The light brown area is the Jewish quarter, and it's very easy to get to the Jewish quarter. And when I'm in Israel, I spend a lot of my time in the Jewish quarter. The red area is below the Temple Mount, and it's kind of an open plaza, and people come there, and that's where the Wailing Wall is the wall of the Temple Mount. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the Arab quarter, which is yellow. So let's go into the Arab quarter, and it takes us out through the Damascus Gate. And the reason we're doing that is we have to go north into the Palestinian area. When I do that, I hire a wonderful older gentleman who's he's a Palestinian Arab, but he's a Christian, and he's an Israeli citizen. And he arranges for young men to drive me into the Palestinian area. I trust him. He's very good. And if it's dangerous, he'll tell me it's dangerous. He's not going to send me. So I feel very comfortable, having him arrange whatever we do. So we're coming out of the Damascus Gate into, here's a picture of the Damascus Gate. You see up on the top those pointed things. They were added later after the Romans destroyed the wall. And we're going to walk into the eastern part of Jerusalem, which is occupied by Arabs. The Arabs live in this part of Jerusalem. And we're going to walk through, and we're going to come to a place where the gentlemen have a car. It's a car with Palestinian plates. So it will be treated properly when we go into the Palestinian area, because the hill country is in the Palestinian area. So we're going to drive up through the hill country, and that's a picture I've taken, which isn't particularly good, but it's not mountainous, it's hilly. And in it, there's a lot of these terraces. It's not densely populated. But there are, every once in a while, you'll see a village. Very often they're up on a high point, the villages, and they have the hills coming down will be terraced for farming, and the sheep are easy to raise there in the hills. So we're going to come now. It says we're going to go back to the story of Gideon. The power of Midian prevailed against Israel. So those are the nomads that came up, from down in the south. They're coming up, crossing over into Israel. Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens, which were in the mountains, and the caves and the strongholds. So the people were, they couldn't defend themselves, and they hid. When your enemy is approaching, you don't have the strength to fight, you find a place to hide, which is what was happening. For it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites would come. So they would come in the spring and early summer when the crops had been planted, and it was easy to get crops and animals, and they just destroyed the land. It was just a destruction of the land when they came. And they would camp against the Israelites and destroy the produce of the earth and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. Now they're Bedouins. They're nomads, and they're coming up from the desert area in the south. I'm going to do another travel journey coming up one of these days on visiting the Bedouins, which I spent some time visiting the Bedouins of Israel, and it was quite an experience. So Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the sons of Israel cried to the Lord. And that's the story of Judges. We fall into the ways of the world, and things get really bad. We cry to the Lord, and He sends a deliverer. Well, of course, our deliverer is Yeshua, so we need to cry out to Yeshua. When I was studying at an ulpan in Israel is where you learn to speak Hebrew. And this was in the late 90s. The Iron Curtain of Russia had fallen, and a lot of the Jews were coming in from Russia, and I was in with them. We were learning to speak Hebrew. And they would take us on trips, because these Russians, they were new to Israel, and they had to learn about Israel. They were going to become Israelites, and they had to learn about it. And, of course, I was with them. And this was a trip where the guide is showing us a wine press, because we read Gideon was beating out wheat in a wine press. Now the wine press is he's standing down in where you stamp your feet, and here's a picture of the wine press. So the red line is that's where that people would stomp their feet, and the wine would pour down into the vat. So the guide is standing in where they stomp the grapes, and right where his right hand is that channel where the juice is going to flow down into the vat. We have here, now Gideon was beating wheat in the wine press. Well, this is a picture of threshing wheat. You put your fork into the grain that's been harvested and throw it up, and the wind will catch it, and the seed is heavy and will fall down, and then the chaff will blow away. Well, he couldn't do it where the chaff would blow it away. He was down in the wine. Look at the wine press. That's where he had to do it. I mean, things were pretty bad, and he was pretty frightened. The Lord said to Gideon, take your father's bull and a second bull 7 years old and pull down the altar of Baal. Now the Canaanites were surrounding the people of Israel, and many of the people of Israel were worshiping Canaanite gods. The Canaanites were polytheistic, but Baal was the head god of all the Canaanite gods. The altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah. Now the Asherah is a woman goddess that the women believed that they could pray to that goddess, and we find the little statues of Asherah all over Israel when they excavate, because life was very difficult for women. They died in childbirth. What we have here is a little statue of the Asherah, and she's the one for women in childbirth, and looking over the women and the children. And then what you see on the right is actually an altar, an old altar that has been found in the hill country that would have, I don't know how old it is, but it must be pretty old. Now, all the Midianites and the Amalekites in the east I can't read the word, something from the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped into the valley of Jezreel. So we're standing up on the top of the hill country, and then it's very steep escarpment dropping down into the flat Jezreel Valley. And we can see the Jezreel Valley down below, very flat, very. So now there's this very steep escarpment. It's not quite a cliff, but it's pretty close to a cliff that drops down into that flat Jezreel Valley. So Gideon and his men were where the red dot is. They're just on the edge of the escarpment, looking down into the Jezreel Valley where the Midianites were. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and the Jezreel, that's his family clan, were called together to follow him. So the first people he gathers together are his own family. They better follow him. Then he sent messengers throughout Manasseh. And Manasseh is all the tribe in the northern hill country. So here's the escarpment. Manasseh is in the northern part of the hill country. So the Jezreel is the family clan. Manasseh is the whole tribe, one of the tribes. So he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they also were called together to follow him. So not only his family, but all from the whole tribe of Manasseh were called out to follow him. He sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up. Now, those are the three tribes in what's called the Upper Galilee. So, look at the top picture. You're in the hill country of Manasseh, looking down on the Jezreel Valley, and on the other side of the Jezreel Valley is the Upper Galilee, the hills of the Upper Galilee, which is where Nazareth is located. Now, Gideon and his men were at the top of Mount Gilboa. Now, this picture is taken from the Jezreel Valley looking south, and that's the escarpment that's the edge of the hill country. We're looking south, and here's Mount Gilboa right here, and it sticks out as into the Jezreel Valley, and that's where they were. They were up on the top of Mount Gilboa, and the enemy were down in the Jezreel Valley. Now, when I was at the old pond, and one of the trips that they took us on, we actually hiked down Mount Gilboa, and it was very exciting for me because I knew the story of Gideon, and this is what Gideon and his men would have done at night. So this is the top of the hill country, and here's me. I'm having a wonderful time with taking pictures of flowers and all kinds of wonderful stuff. But here's where we went to start down. It was a trail. There was a rope we could hold on to and kind of stake pounded into the rock where the rope was attached. It was really a crumbly, it was quite a difficult hike going down Mount Gilboa. And I could imagine Gideon and his men going down at night. It must have been quite a feat. Then Gideon and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod. Now this is down in the Jezreel Valley. And the spring is there. There's a huge amount of water that comes from underneath Mount Gilboa and forms the Lord said to Gideon, "Whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead." So 22,000 people returned, but 10,000 remained. And then the Lord said to Gideon, "I will deliver you with only 300 men, and will give the Midianites into your hands." So, and I'm sure you know the story of how they went to drink water, and if they bowed down, and lapped water with their face in the water, that was like worshiping idols. And only those who put water into their hands and lifted their hands up to their mouth were not worshiping idols. I'm going to take you now to Ma'ayan Harod National Park. It's a wonderful place to visit. My husband and I visited here. And it's a very popular place for Israelis to come. There's a lot of water. I mean, it's just water that comes from that spring. And there's just a lot of water. There are trails for hiking on, and people swim there. They have a wonderful time. This is the Harod National Park, Mahayan Harod National Park. And the spring where Gideon and his men came down at night from Mount Gilboa, and they were camped by that spring, and ready to fight. They were with only 300 of them. Now, the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. So what we have here is the flat Jezreel Valley, and there are about 3 mountains that kind of stick up in the middle of Jezreel Valley, and Moreh, the hill of Moreh is one of them. And here's another picture. It's a little easier to see. So we're looking across the flat Jezreel Valley, and Mount Moreh sticks up out of the Jezreel Valley. So I'm going to take you now on a little walk. It's the Givat HaMoreh Forest, and it's a wonderful place. There's so many places to go in Israel, and whenever I go to these biblical sites, and it's as if I'm there, at the time of the biblical sites. So there are trails for hiking on. You get to the very edge, you can look down on the Jezreel Valley. So we're looking south across the Jezreel Valley, and the reason it's misty is because it's agricultural and irrigated. So there's a lot of moisture. There's moisture in the air, and we can't see Mount Gilboa. But if you look across the Jezreel Valley, Mount Gilboa would be over on the other side in the south. And we read, Gideon and the men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just posted the watch. So they're coming in the middle of the night. The Midianites are sound asleep. They've got a few guards, but the Midianites are sound asleep. And Gideon and 300 men blow the trumpets, and inside the pitchers are the lanterns with fire. So they break the pitchers. So you can imagine the Midianites, they hear this loud, huge noise. Louder than a thunderclap, because all 300 of them are blowing this trumpet. It is huge noise. And then this blast of light. And what happened was that the Midianite soldiers, they got up and they didn't know what was happening, and they started milling around, and with all the confusion, they weren't in battle order or anything. They were just so confused. Gideon and his 300 were able to come in and destroy the Midianites, because they didn't know what was going on. They didn't have their weapons. It was just confusion, which allowed them to come in and defeat the Midianites. It's quite a story, and when you go to Israel and you're able to kind of walk through the story and you can see these things, you experience what actually happened. It's an amazing thing to do, to experience what was actually happening. So what we get now is, in our conclusion, we've learned a lot. And of course, everything, has a message. I asked you to imagine Gideon and his family hiding from the enemy in the hill country. Now, that sometimes I see a lot of that right now, and with this whole political situation that the United States is in right now, it's in our own country. And people think, the end of time is coming because things are so terrible. It must be the end of time that is coming. And how are you responding? Well, you need to stand for God, whether it's the end of time or not. We're supposed to expect the end of time any day. But, you should not feel any fear, any anxiety, any concern, and don't hide in the hill country. Stand for God and just trust God that he knows what he's doing. All right. Then Gideon grew in his confidence of God. Now, it didn't happen overnight. God had to do some things to help build his confidence and his courage and his trust in the Lord. And that's really what happens with us. And it's a maturing process. And I hope you are experiencing that maturing process of growing closer and closer to God. And when you do it, you just feel more at peace. Things are not bothering you. You're not anxious. You're not worried, that the end of time is coming. If it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You're just at peace. You're at peace with your life, with God, and those around you. And finally, only a small number of God's people have the confidence to be true disciples of the Lord. I think that's a very important message that we have here. And because only, out of, I can't remember, 22,000 started, and only 300, were qualified by God to fight for him. And I think that's prophetic of God's ultimate selection of a remnant. And it will be a very small number. And I always tell people, if you think you're going to be in the remnant, you won't, because that is the sin of pride. So just, we have no idea whether we're going to be in the remnant or not. We just live our lives. We're maturing in our understanding of God and our submitting to Yeshua to be his follower. And we're just maturing in our understanding of God and his word. And if God selects us, fine. If not, he knows what's best. We're going to be with God eventually, because it's not just the remnant that will be saved. The remnant play a role in ultimately helping to bring all of God's people into God's presence. So with that, I will wish you shalom, and I'll be back to do some more travels in Israel. We'll have fun. Shalom.